Hey everyone, this is Dr. Emily Scherning with American Resiliency here with an up-to-date climate outlook for all of our friends in Utah. My first generation video on Utah got more viewer pushback, more ground pushback than any other state by a large margin. Many people got in contact with me to tell me that their experience on the ground was already worse than the NCA4 projections. And many people also sent me resources about the catastrophic possibilities related to the potential loss of the Great Salt Lake. This assistance and research has informed my NCA5 revision for Utah, and I'm grateful to have received your valuable ground insights. When the science isn't hitting the ground, that's when I need the AR community the most. You all keep me on the right track. Regarding the Great Salt Lake, I think a lot of us need some background facts. When I was looking for Great Salt Lake images, I was really consistently moved by the quality of images in this paper, which I'll share in the video description. Look at this picture of the drying Great Salt Lake, where we can see a bridge going over dry land. That really lets us see how much this lake has changed. Or here, this is another great image of the Great Salt Lake, the drying Great Salt Lake. And it's an evocative, dreamlike landscape. And if you're a person like me, whose background lake assumptions are connected to the Great Lakes, this is also a really weird lake. Honestly, from a lake perspective, where Lake Michigan is your normal lake, this is a creepy lake. It's kind of a stinky brine lake. And I think that's part of why people haven't been good stewards to this lake, is because think about it from human purposes, this lake is gross. You could easily think about this lake as this is where the garbage water goes after it finishes flowing down the mountains. You could easily think it would be better to use the water to grow stuff like this. This is a beautiful picture of the gardens at Temple Square. The gardens through Salt Lake City Metro are some of the most beautiful in America. And a lot of the water in the Wasatch Mountains and their watershed is being used also for agriculture to grow cows like these and other crops that people eat and things that people need and use. And if you take a minute to think of this lake from a migrating bird's perspective, from the perspective of dozens and dozens of species, this lake is more like the West's greatest snack bar. I love this picture because it shows the super abundant flies that are very gross from a human's perspective, makes this a very unappealing human destination. But look at this little juvenile bird. He looks so happy. He's like walking through a cloud of Doritos. I think that these are important things to consider as we think about how we got where we are. You can see that in this photo from 2022, the Great Salt Lake is way smaller than it was in the 80s. And this is a great photo of what can happen when new parts of the lake bed are exposed. We can see the dust from the lake bed can go over a large area. So I think we're all on the same page now about the current seriousness of the extent of the lake loss. Like we're talking about 75% of the lake volume is gone today, as well as why this might have happened, why it might have seemed like a logical or even a positive use of the water. Not that this was like a malignant misuse of the water. And this potential loss, the Great Salt Lake, and we're not saying this is a passive loss. We'll lose it if people keep actively using all the water that needs to flow into the weird toxic bird buffet. This potential loss is a hazard to the region. Utah has a water management issue here with enormous moral implications. In the recent Oregon video, I went beyond the NCA5 to send a warning about the need to care for the land to prevent soil loss in conditions of increasing aridity that could lead to a new dust bowl. In Utah, I think that I need to go beyond the NCA5 again. This is an urgent cry for stewardship, and this is one where we can all act. This isn't just a local action issue. If the Great Salt Lake is allowed to be lost, we don't just lose SLC Metro. We see a potentially large land area poisoned. It'll be poisoned as the wind blows, and you all might have noticed that the winds are very strong lately. This is the second major preventable disaster we see in the West, the second tipping point we could avert with human behavior. What we're going to see in the NCA5 projections for Utah, there is habitable area we could lose if we lose the lake. We're looking through two veils here. And all of you who were critical of the NCA4 content related to Utah, who told me these projections do not fit, I want to hear from you and hear if the NCA5 is closer to the mark. Here's where to find those resources. As we get into the state level information, we're going to be using the NCA5 as our primary resource. If you want to follow along with me on figures, go to chapters and down to all figures. You'll find that they're downloadable. Sometimes I also use information that's only findable through the NCA5 Atlas, which gives county level data. It's not super user friendly, so we're fortunate AR volunteers led by Dustin ported the information from the NCA5 Atlas into our toolkit here, which lets us look at the same great NCA5 data, those publicly available tool sets, in ways that let us bring out new stories and information and look at temperature points in sort of a side-by-side way where we can really visualize the change from 1.5C, where we are now, to 2C, where we're headed. I think many people have heard of 1.5C as this threshold in the future that we're trying not to cross. It's worth noting that we can see here in this figure from the Copernicus Institute that through May of 2024, we have been experiencing this unusual climate anomaly where we have bumped up past 1.5C, averaged for more than a year now, and that's never happened before. We're not where we thought we were going to be, all of us who were climate aware and all of us who are here on this planet in this rapid, unprecedented warming. Consensus federal monitoring used to put 2C as a likely average around mid-century, around 2050. And that's why my old NCA4 level climate outlooks talk about themselves as 2050 climate outlooks. We've switched over now to 2C terminology because we know 2C is coming next, but we're really not sure of the timeline. And I think it's important for us to look forward to 2C now to start building resilience now. I want you to know where those resources are because I want you to be able to do your own research. I want you to be able to confirm everything I report without too much work on your end. And even in these rapidly changing conditions, at American Resiliency, the reason we're using the fifth National Climate Assessment data and figures is because they represent the highest consensus climate science available. And your tax dollars paid for the development and review of that document, so you deserve access. But as a matter of congressional mandate, there's no direct federal funding for communication to the public about the National Climate Assessment. And that made me so mad I founded American Resiliency. We're the only nonprofit focused on communicating this important information to the public, and we run on your donations. Thanks for sticking through the preamble. We're in our first figure now, which has made me very interested in the NCA5 projections for Utah since I first laid eyes on it. You'll see that here in figure 1.14, the national overview for changes at 2C, what I've been describing as Utah's ominous high change blob. The question is, what's going on with the blob? I've been circling the blob. I've read the figures for every state around the blob except for Nevada. And Nevada, you know it's not going to be good. So let's be patient. Let me follow the water rights news a little more before I give you your message. You all in Nevada are doing very good work on water conservation, I gotta say. But back to the blob. What this blob says here is that change is going to be higher than average in Utah, a couple degrees off more than you might expect in the general region. Let's see what that means. Let's go to figure 2.11. At first glance, what I'm going to say about this big confusing figure is that it's hard to see what's going on here, especially for Utah. So we're going to talk about the whole state, and then we're going to take a minute and look in, like kind of zoom in around the lake. All right, so we're looking at hot days, days over 95, and warm nights, additional nights over 70. And these are just snips out of figure 2.11 so that we can zoom in, we can see them a little more clearly. In a desert environment, those cool nights are really important, and it's upsetting to see how much you're losing them. That's a dramatic gain projected in nights over 70 in the low deserts of Utah. In Moab, that dark patch around Moab, you're looking at a 3-week increase. That's going to be very impactful as it's going to come in the summer tourism season. That's going to be very dangerous for people who are not used to the heat, who are coming into your region especially. All right, now we're zooming in on the lake, and I know that this looks like garbage. I'm really sorry. We have a dedicated team of amazing super nerds who are working on getting 6-kilometer resolution NCA5 data ported into a visualization engine, but we're not there yet. So we're going to look at these blurry visuals that make you think you have cataracts for just a minute, but they do help us a little bit. You can see that if we're looking at SLC Metro, we're talking about much of the developed area kind of to the south of the lakes and by Provo picking up a lot of potential warm nights, like up to an additional month of nights over 70 as we get to 2C. And that although the daytime warming isn't so bad in SLC and some of the suburbs up around here, that the daytime warming is. That most of the developed area in and around SLC Metro is looking at 3 to 4 weeks of additional days over 95 by 2C. For desert areas especially, I like to do a double check on heat at this hot days map in the American Resiliency Tools, because you would think that figure 2.11 showing days over 95 would show you all the days over 95, but it actually doesn't include days over 100 or over 105. So in this engine here, we've stacked up the data set. I want to make sure we're not looking at a lot of hidden heat in the SLC metro counties. And you can see here that this actually, we see a measure of mercy. We are seeing only like a handful of hidden hot days here, maybe less than 5 additional days over 100 in that 3 to 4 week additional hot season in the SLC metro area. There is substantial hidden heat, however, in the low desert areas where we were talking about an additional month over 95. If you looked just at figure 2.11, it looks like maybe we're talking about more like a 5 week hot season increase within a week on top of that over 100. So that's a very serious heat up in both of your major low desert areas in Utah. So we're talking about a big summer heat increase in both developed and low elevation areas. Generally speaking, though, throughout the state, Utah's mountains look well preserved in terms of summer heat. Let's get some more information. Let's talk about the winter. So we're back in 2.11 for a minute, talking about cold days, talking about loss of days at or below 32. And we can see here some hot spots for cold loss in the Wasatch Mountains, where you're looking at maybe 3 weeks of cold loss. Throughout the state, at least 2 weeks of cold loss, another hot spot down here in the Abajo Mountains. And that's letting us look at duration. But what we need when we're thinking about cold and snowpack is not just the duration of the change, it's the intensity of the change. Let's go to figure 11.3 to look at that. This figure lets us look at changes in the intensity of winter lows through plant hardiness zones, but you can see it's too big and crazy to actually be useful. So I'm just letting you know where the information is coming from. And now we're going to go to some SNPs so that we can look at the change in the present day climate normals to this mid-century projection, which, like we talked about in the intro, is going to be about a 2C projection. So we see this is a substantial change in winter intensity that is particularly cruel for the southern mountains of Utah. This degree of cold loss will be a substantial change in character. The hydrology will change significantly in most of Utah's mountains outside of the Wasatch Range. The Wasatch Range doesn't look so bad. We can see in this figure, this little dark blue dot remaining is Capitol Reef. Capitol Reef is preserved. And that there are little islands where there's potential for some snowpack preservation dotting the lower spine, the southern spine of those mountains. It's really worth noting how much of the Wasatch Mountains see good potential for snowpack preservation that is very helpful and hopeful for potential for some hydrology preservation in northern Utah, which we need hydrology preservation if we're going to have any chance of having enough water to put into the lake to stop that toxic dust from coming out of the lake. Overall here, if we're thinking about the most populated parts of Utah, if we're thinking up by the SLC metro region, we saw a hot season change around the foothills of the Wasatch Mountains that was pretty intense, but we can see here the Wasatch Mountains are going to hold the cold. And as we've seen in the states of the Pacific Northwest, that is not a prognosis. Not all mountains are going to be holding the cold. So let's talk about water. We're going to start that over here in figure 210. You can see at 2C, there's more rain projected in the northwest corner of Utah, but it's so dry there. I don't know what that means you're going to get. Like if you're going to get 3 drops of rain instead of 2 drops of rain. We're going to look at changes in inches in a minute, because I think particularly in low precipitation environments, that's what we need to know. The most important thing that I'm seeing in figure 210 right now is that they are calling statistically significant more precipitation over the Wasatch Mountains. They're saying probable 5% increase in precipitation. Around the country, many people have begun experiencing really intense extreme storms. In figure 212, we can see projected changes to precipitation extremes at 2C. And in Utah, I know it's hard to see this across three figures, but here, give me a second. We can see that in all three of these maps, there's two, there's three. We do have some hot spots in Utah for extreme forms of precipitation. In the first and the third map, that's sort of centered high, kind of up around Provo and just south of Provo. But if we look at the subfigure B in 2.12, the 5-year maximum daily precipitation, so this is like your major superstorms, it's low. It's down below Provo. It's centered in the middle of the state. It looked to me like it was over Manti La Sal National Forest. I think that this is significant. I mean, we'd rather maybe see the superstorms not in a populated area, but I suspect that this has the potential to mess up your infrastructure. This every 5-year storm signal looks to me like it's falling over the I-15 and the I-70. That both of those major interstates would be in the intense flash flood zone that you can only imagine would result if you dumped a huge deluge on a desert mountain. I don't mean to be too much of a nut here, but that's a really serious infrastructure area to put out of commission if you've ever thought about someone trying to get out of Las Vegas in event of a major issue in Las Vegas. Getting back to business though, this is changes in inches at mid-century. And we can see here that much of Utah in figure 4.3 is looking like it is likely to get a little bit more rain. That light blue color that you see over much of the state is up to half an inch increase. And some of those low desert areas, half an inch can cause a heck of a bloom. So that's interesting. And it's interesting also because between 4.3 and 2.10, we do see some disagreement in the drought trend for Utah. This shows a little bit more rain falling than we would expect, and we don't see as much rain as we would have expected from 210 coming into the Wasatch Mountains and their foothills as we might have expected from 2.10. So I think there's a lot hanging in the balance in here. This is another critical water figure. This is our snowmelt water equivalent, and we've got a problem here. Up by SLC Metro, it looks like you're losing a little bit more than an inch of snowwater melt equivalent. And in 4.3, that area was gaining a little less than an inch of additional precipitation. So we're looking at a small imbalance, like a half-inch imbalance in precipitation through these models. It's a little bit of an unclear, hanging in the balance type signal, and it is going to complicate our problem with the Great Salt Lake. We need more water going into the Great Salt Lake, not less. And if the total water supply is less throughout the year because of the local loss, snowpack water inches, that means we'd have to reduce water usage in this developed populated area even more to get more water going into the lake. And from a communications perspective, if we do have some signals in these federal reports indicating more rain is coming, why wouldn't people keep up their current water use? More rain coming is not a message that's going to motivate behavior change, but we need more margin on that lake. It's 3/4 we've lost already. A few years of serious drought could end up poisoning a large area with the toxic dust from that lake bed. So bottom line, we need more resilience around the lake margin, regardless of the precipitation trend. But before we think that problem through, let's look at the fire map. That's figure 7.4. Across the state, we see about a 250-ish% increase in days where large wildfires are possible. That's not going to be a shocker to anyone. Fire resilience is going to be important throughout the West. It does further complicate our water picture, right? All right, now that we've scared or bored off anyone who shouldn't be listening, I'm going to show you some of the potentially most beautifully preserved territory in the country. It's up in those mountains, up in the Wasatch Mountains. Let me show you through the wet bulb tool. So this is a powerful tool that was made by AR volunteers. It overlays several NCA5 data sets to let us look at where projected changes in risk for killing heat are coming. And if we look at Utah, we see some of these extremely desirable areas where there's a very limited increase in wet bulb risk, where we're still talking about less than a week of potentially dangerous heat. And you can see at 2C, potentially dangerous heat, where we're talking about this purple and this red, 4 and 4+ wet bulb temps, that's kind of outside of my comfort zone. And I sometimes think of myself as relatively tough. All these communities, not the foothill communities, the high up communities, the mountain communities, they look wonderful. They have wonderful cold preservation. They have wonderful summer cool preservation all around. So this area is incredible, but we don't want a bunch more people going to these small communities because we need the water to get down to the lake. We can't max out the ag footprint because the water needs to get down to the lake. These are the communities, they're wearing the mantle. Their local climate future, it's good. It's a blessing. These communities will feel the same, they'll look the same when many communities have been harshly transformed. And here's the challenge. They're the ones, these ones who face the least change, who must change the most. And it's a change in the heart because they must change their behavior the most. Their water conservation is the most important. They're at the top of the mountain. They impact all the water flowing downhill. These communities need to not take advantage of new opportunities for agriculture, even if it turns out more water is coming their way. And in a culture of growth, we must all understand what a big change it is to turn away from growth. And I need to speak to this challenge as a religious person because this privileged area, this beautiful area up in the Wasatch Mountains, it's a deeply religious area. In Salt Lake City, it's a diverse metropolitan city, but it's also a city built on faith. So I want to talk for a minute, Gentile to Gentile, which is a line I always want to use because, I'm like intensely Jewish. My life experience, there are many ways that it's been a normal American life experience and that I was raised with certain prejudices. And I want to admit that I was raised to think poorly of the LDS church. And I'm grateful that I've been able to overcome that prejudice in good part because of participating in interfaith events and spending time in the state of Arizona where they had the opportunity to meet and befriend many LDS women. I met so many ladies who deeply impressed me with the quality of their characters and their fundamental deep resilience. I think the LDS focus on the home and on home resource management, they're both very valuable. And I want to say the LDS Church does a real public service. In this website here, Provident Living, which I'll put in the video description, LDS Church provides some of the most affordable and best quality long-term storage food. I can say, as a person who in public, I often present as a religious person, I often present as a visibly Jewish person, I can say my experiences with Provident Living have been great. I haven't experienced any religious pressure. No one surprise baptismed me. I just met a lot of people who were engaged deeply in acts of service and kindness. We gotta get real though, LDS. Your faith culture and mine. As groups, we're too obsessed with money and we're too obsessed with appearances. Turning out a large family to look nice on a holiday is a big production, and it's a big statement. Throwing a party with like 19 of those fancy Jello salads, Gentile to Gentile, we love weird salads too, and those babies can be a production. Like that ribbon salad, that's not an operation for the faint of heart. In these cultures, I don't know that all of the men understand it, but I know that all of the women know. In a culture of traditional, well-managed homes, every lady who goes to a party knows what everything costs. And we all know, we all know. And in our cultures, that's part of how we show our faith, right? That's part of how we show that God's face smiles upon us is by these displays of wealth. But we know in our hearts that's not what God wants. As it says in Hosea 6:6, God desires deeds of loving kindness, not temple sacrifice. Loving kindness, or chesed, we would say in Hebrew. In the prophetic writings, chesed is repeatedly called as the path to atonement above any other signifying deed. I think all of us in America, religious or not, are impacted by our culture of infinite growth, requiring consumption, making consumption our identity. The only way we signal to people what we are worth is what we buy. But it doesn't have to be this way. And people of faith are the people across human history who most often drive cultural change. This has often been done through powerful lived example, not through violence or through brutality. This is often done by showing this is the way a person would want to live. I want to take a minute to talk about the Shakers. You probably heard about Shakers because they made really good furniture, but we don't have a lot of them around anymore because they were super into celibacy, which in a culture of infinite growth, celibacy has become about the most radical life choice a person can make, right? The Shakers, they were a counterpoint to their age. The Shakers pushed back, and we hear their message today as prophetic voice through this song. I want to have this song for you. It speaks powerfully to me today. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be. And when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be in the valley of love and delight. When true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend we shan't be ashamed. To turn will be our delight, till by turning we come round right. This song was heard as a prophetic voice song in its day, and it echoes today in our time of the turning. Utah, there's no state with people more capable of coordinated action than your people. You could save the Great Salt Lake. And I won't give up hope because I know how fast things could change. We're all starting to see that, and we can all respond to this call. The best path forward requires less. It requires that we all say enough and that we don't buy the thing, that we find ways to cut back, to give more, to engage more fully in your life beyond what you can buy. Our values, no matter what they are, should be more than things that can be measured in dollars and cents. Utah outside the Wasatch Mountains is looking pretty intense. Those deserts are turning extra desert. Hot enough lately that the soil crust is dying in some places. It's bad. And I think it's worth saying again, there are signals for every 5-year type storms, rare but regular serious storms, right around where the 70 and the 15 come near each other in Utah. That looks like it could be a problem for regional transit. But the Wasatch Mountains and the foothills stand a chance. They're connected, they're better connected with many areas that are going to continue to have good resource access in the north. And there could be enough water. It's going to be getting hotter in the foothills than previously projected. But we're not seeing a ton of days over 100 in the projections. We're talking about potentially survivable conditions. We're going to need to trade out some of the more heat sensitive ornamentals and trees in the gardens down there. But there's still conditions where SLC Metro people, you could still plant a beautiful garden. Loving kindness, stewardship, and responsibility. The duty of care. These are the things that can make the best future possible for Utah and the West unfurl. We could save the Great Salt Lake, but we need not a call to science based on evidence and attribution, which those are great tools sometimes, but those tools aren't working here. We know they're not working, and we know that yelling louder isn't working either. We need here a call to faith, to our belief in ourselves and our ability to do good, our human ability to do good and rise above ourselves. I will not give up on my belief in humanity's deep ability to make the right choice and to surprise us sometimes in the moments where everything is the darkest. Let's do our best. Let's get ready. Folks, thanks for watching. I hope you know that the heart of the AR mission is not that you should agree with me on all philosophical points, but that you should have access to climate information so you can make decisions about your future. I want to take a moment to thank the AR community, the donors, the volunteers, everyone helping to spread the word online, and especially everyone doing the work on the ground. American Resiliency is a registered 501c3. If you'd like to make a donation, please visit our website, www.americanresiliency.org, and you'll find a donation link at the top right corner of the page. Wishing you all the best and talk with you again soon.